a blacksmith walked into the lair of the most feared sorcerer in the kingdom, and defeated him without drawing a single blade. In a forgotten kingdom, beneath iron gray peaks, there lived a blacksmith who would one day unmake a sorcerer without ever raising a blade against him. They called the realm Valmir, though few travelers spoke its name aloud, for it sat at the edge of the known world, cloaked in mist and old sorrow. The mountains rose like broken teeth around it, and within their shadow huddled the village of Dunmorrow, where the people lived by the rhythm of hammers and seasons. Here the blacksmith worked at his forge, beside the rushing millstream, his shoulders broad from years of shaping iron, his hands scarred but steady. The villagers knew him as Cedric, though the children whispered that he carried the quiet of something older than his years, as though fate had already written his name in a story he had not yet learned to read. Cedric rose before dawn, when the sky wore the color of cooled ash. He pumped the bellows until the coals breathed like living things, and he hammered plowshares, horseshoes, and hinges. For the folk who could pay, and for those who could not, he worked all the same. His clothes were patch leather and rough spun wool. His home was a single room above the smithy, smelling of charcoal and rain. Yet within his chest beat a calm so deep that even the weariest soul felt lighter. After speaking with him, often they left without paying in full, pressing a loaf of bread into his calloused palms. Cedric would only smile and say that Providence provided, not men, but beyond the village, where the ridgeline sank into a valley, choked with ancient timber, the people did not go. They spoke of the Hollow Vale, a forest where the light behaved strangely, where the wind carried voices that had no throats, and where at its black heart, the ruins of Castle Morvain clawed at the sky. Within those crumbling towers dwelled a sorcerer of terrible power, a man who had bargained with the shadows of the world, and won. Now when the sun dipped behind the western ridge, the villagers barred their doors and whispered prayers to the light, and no hunter dared enter those woods. Cedric listened to the tales, as he listened to all things, with patience and without judgment. He did not hate the sorcerer. Hate required a fire that Cedric had never learned to tend. He simply worked, and waited, and trusted that the wheel of destiny turned for all men alike. Then came the evening that changed everything. Autumn had painted the valley in shades of rust and gold. Cedric walked the path home along the stream when he saw it. Above the treeline of the Hollow Vale, a pulse of blue light split the gloaming, not like lightning, but like a wound in the fabric of the world itself. It hung there for 3 heartbeats, then faded, leaving a scar upon the darkness. Cedric stopped. The air had grown cold. Something stirred in his chest. Not fear, but a pull, as though a thread tied to his ribs had been tugged from the heart of the forest. He knew, with the certainty of dreams, that he could not turn away. He did not fetch a weapon. The blacksmith took only his heavy woolen cloak and the lantern that hung by his door. He walked toward the Hollow Vale, each step deliberate, as though the earth itself were testing his resolve. The moment his boots crossed the boundary, where the meadow met the trees, the world changed. The temperature plummeted. The branches overhead wove into a vault that swallowed the stars, and the silence that fell was watchful, as though the forest held its breath around him. The path wound between oaks, older than the kingdom itself, their bark silver gray in the gloom. Cedric pressed on, his lantern casting a sphere of amber light that held the dark at bay. At last the trees parted, and the blacksmith stood before Castle Morvain. It rose from the earth, like a memory of violence, its walls cracked and draped in ivy that had forgotten the sun. The gates, iron-bound and taller than 3 men, bore sigils that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Before his fingers touched the cold metal, the gates groaned inward of their own accord, revealing a hall beyond, where darkness pooled like water. He entered. The air smelled of dust and old magic. Far ahead, a faint blue glow beckoned. He followed it through corridors that turned back upon themselves in ways that defied geometry. The castle was less a building than a question, and Cedric walked toward its answer. The hall opened into a chamber, vast enough to swallow sound. At its center stood a figure robed in shadow, and around him the blue light coiled, like a living thing. The sorcerer turned. His eyes burned with that same luminescence, and his face, pale and angular, held an expression of such ancient weariness that it stopped Cedric more surely than any spell. This was Morvain, the lord of the Hollow Vale, the nightmare of Valmir, and he looked at the blacksmith, not with malice, but with curiosity that bordered on sorrow. "You should not have come," Morvain said, and his voice was the sound of stones grinding in deep places. "Men fear this place. They fear me. I did not come to fear you," Cedric replied, his voice rough from smoke and honest work. "I came to understand." The sorcerer studied him. "Interesting. In 30 years you are the first to enter these halls, without terror written upon your heart." He drifted closer, and the light swirled around his fingers. "You are different, blacksmith. I am only a man who works with iron and fire," Cedric said. Morvain laughed, though the sound held no joy. "No, you are far more, though you do not yet know it. And because you amuse me, I will offer you a gift beyond reckoning. Wealth, power, the command of fate itself. And in return, everything has a price." Morvain whispered, "You need only surrender your truth, bend your heart to my purpose, and the world will kneel before you." The blacksmith felt the weight of the offer. Then he looked into the sorcerer's burning eyes, and saw the void behind them, the loneliness that no spell could fill. "If I must surrender what makes me myself," Cedric said slowly, "then what use is power? It would not be me who wields it, but a hollow wearing my face." Morvain went still. The light around him flickered, and for a moment the mask of the terrible sorcerer slipped, revealing something raw and astonished beneath. "You truly are different," he murmured. "Very well. Let us play a game. If you succeed, you shall have power without losing your soul. If you fail, you remain here forever." "What must I do?" Beyond the castle, the Hollow Vale deepens where old magic sleeps. There lies the luminous stone, a fragment of the first dawn. "Bring it to me," Cedric considered. The task was meant to be impossible, a trap to break his spirit. But the thread in his chest pulled still, and he knew that destiny did not call men backward. "I will succeed," he said. Morvain smiled, and it was the saddest expression Cedric had ever seen. "Success, blacksmith. Not effort. Success." He gestured, and a door opened where none had been. "Go." Cedric turned, and walked into the forest once more. The Hollow Vale had changed. The trees stood in ranks, like the columns of a cathedral, and the ground had become soft, as though he walked upon the flesh of something dreaming. The lantern's flame shrank to a pinprick, yet Cedric did not falter. He thought of the forge, of the way iron became steel, only through enduring fire, and he understood that this forest was a forge of its own. Soon the path divided. To the left, a way of smooth stones and gentle moonlight, inviting as a lullaby. To the right, a track of black mud and tangled roots, choked with thorns, descending into a gorge where no light reached. Cedric remembered that the straightest blade was hammered from the hardest ore. He chose the dark path. The mud clutched at his boots, and twice he sank to his knees, the cold seeping through his clothes. He found a fallen branch, and levered himself forward, his muscles burning. The thorns tore at his cloak, and drew blood upon his forearms. Yet with every struggle, he felt something within him hardening into resolve. After what felt like hours, the ground firmed, and he emerged into a clearing that pulsed with pale radiance. There, upon a pedestal of moss-grown granite, lay the luminous stone. It was no larger than his fist, yet it shone with a blue-white radiance that seemed to sing without sound. Cedric approached. He reached out. The earth shook. From the soil and mist, a shape rose. It was a sentinel of stone and root, a creature of the forest's ancient heart. its form shifting between beast and statue, its eyes pools of molten silver. It towered over Cedric, and when it spoke, the voice resonated in his bones. "This stone is not for the unworthy," the guardian said. "Prove yourself, or be unmade." "I am ready," Cedric answered. "What is strength?" "Strength is not in the blow that shatters," Cedric said. "It is in the hands that shape, and in the heart that waits. True strength is patience, and truth, and the courage to be kind, when cruelty would be easier." "What is fear?" "Fear is the shadow cast by the unknown. But if a man walks through, the shadow fades, for fear cannot survive in the light of understanding." A tremor passed through the guardian's stony form. "Why do you seek this stone?" "Not for power over others," Cedric said. "I seek it to know what I am capable of, to learn if a simple man, with no magic but his own heart, can stand before the dark, and not be consumed." The sentinel did not move, for 3 long breaths. Then it bowed its great head, and dissolved into mist and falling leaves. The stone's light intensified, warm as a summer morning. Cedric stepped forward, and closed his fingers around it. Energy surged through him, awakening, and for a fleeting instant he saw the weave of the world, the fragile lattice of fate connecting all living things. Then the vision faded. He turned and began the journey back. And now the forest seemed to step aside for him, the thorns drawing back, as though the Hollow Vale itself had accepted his passage. When he emerged before Castle Morvain, the gate stood open, and the sorcerer waited within the great hall. Morvain watched Cedric enter, and the astonishment upon his features was genuine. "You actually retrieved it," Morvain said. "The task was not as impossible as it appeared," Cedric replied. Morvain laughed. "A broken sound. No, Blacksmith. It was impossible. You simply refused to believe it." He approached, and for the first time, Cedric saw how thin the sorcerer was beneath his robes, how his hands trembled with a palsy that no spell could cure. "You have proven yourself." He touched the luminous stone. Light erupted through the hall, racing along the walls, illuminating murals hidden beneath centuries of grime, scenes of a kingdom bright and whole. Before the shadow fell, Morvain's voice dropped to a whisper. "This stone does not grant dominion. It grants sight. The sight to see what is real, beneath all illusion." "What illusion?" "The illusion that we are separate. That power must be taken. That the world is a thing to be conquered, rather than healed." Morvain turned away, and his shoulders sagged. "But sight is not enough. There is more you must see." He led Cedric down a spiral stair, into the bedrock beneath the castle. The air grew thick and cold, and the light of the stone pushed back the dark, to reveal a chamber that made Cedric's blood run still. Cages lined the walls, and within them sat men and women, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow with captivity. An old man with a beard of dirty silver, a boy no older than 14, women clutching one another for warmth. They looked up as Cedric entered, and in their gazes he saw a desperate, dying hope. "Why are they here?" Cedric demanded. "They are weak," Morvain said, the old coldness returning, though it sounded forced now. "A mask slipping. The world devours the weak. I keep them safe from a cruelty greater than mine." "Safe?" Cedric stepped toward the nearest cage. "These are not animals to be pinned. They are souls. They are fate's children, same as you or I." "You speak of healing," Morvain said, but his words lacked conviction. "But the world is a blade. It cuts." Cedric turned to face him, and the luminous stone blazed between them. "Then let us be the hands that mend the wound, not the edge that deepens it." They stood in silence. Then Morvain turned, and climbed the stair without a word, leaving Cedric alone with the captives. That night, Cedric could not sleep. He sat in his chamber, the stone pulsing upon the table. He closed his eyes, and the artifact showed him visions. He saw Morvain as a young man, not a sorcerer but a scholar, gentle and eager, beloved by a village that no longer existed. He saw the betrayal, the accusations of witchcraft, the fire that took everything. He saw a man broken not by malice, but by grief, wrapping himself in power, because power was the only armor that fit. The vision faded, and Cedric understood. Morvain was not evil. He was a wound that had never been allowed to heal. Before dawn, Cedric descended to the dungeon again. The prisoners stirred as he approached, and he set to work upon the locks, with tools from his own belt. For a blacksmith knows the language of iron. One by one the cages opened. They moved toward the stairs, toward freedom. A voice cracked across the chamber. "Stop." Morvain stood in the doorway, his eyes wild, the blue light around him churning like a storm at sea. "You dare defy me in my own house?" Cedric stepped between the sorcerer and the prisoners, his hands empty. "I dare to do what is right. I could unmake you where you stand." "You could," Cedric agreed, "but you will not." "And why is that?" "Because you are tired, Morvain. You have spent 30 years building a fortress to protect a heart that only wanted to be held. Now, faced with a man who sees you, truly sees you, you must choose. Will you be the monster they named you, or the man you were meant to become?" The sorcerer faltered. The light around him sputtered. "They burned my home," he whispered. "They called me devil. They made me into what they feared." "Then let it end," Cedric said softly. "Not with more fire, with forgiveness." Morvain's hands fell to his sides. The prisoners slipped past him and up the stairs, and the sorcerer did not stop them. He sank to his knees upon the cold stone, and the terrible light that had surrounded him for decades dimmed to a wavering spark. "I am so tired," he said. Cedric knelt beside him and placed a hand upon his shoulder. "You need not fight anymore. The war is over." The days that followed were unlike any the kingdom of Valmir had known. Morvain emerged from the Hollow Vale, not as a conqueror, but as a pilgrim. He released the spells that had bound the forest, and the trees grew green and ordinary. He walked among the people of Dunmorrow, his robes exchanged for simple wool, his power set aside like a sword too heavy to carry. With his knowledge, he began to heal the sick, to bless the crops, to teach the children their letters. And Cedric returned to his forge. He stood before the bellows, hammering iron into shape, his face lit by the honest orange glow of the coals. The people came to him still, with broken tools and broken hearts, and he received them with the same quiet patience. But now when they looked at him, they saw more than a blacksmith. They saw the man who had walked into the dark and returned with light. They saw the legend born not from battle, but from understanding. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the peaks of Valmir, a child came to the smithy. She watched Cedric work, then asked, "How did you defeat the sorcerer?" Cedric set down his hammer. "I did not defeat him. I saw him. And when you truly see someone, the fight ends." "But he was so powerful. He could have destroyed you." "Power that destroys is not strength. It is fear wearing a crown. True strength is the courage to reach out. When the world teaches you to strike, it is the choice to heal what is broken, rather than break what threatens you." The child considered this. "Will I be strong like that someday?" Cedric smiled. "You already are. You simply have not yet learned to see it." The legend spread beyond Valmir, carried by traders into kingdoms that had never heard the name of Dunmorrow. It became a story told at hearths and in halls, a myth for the ages. And though the years passed, and Cedric's hair turned the color of the ash he had swept from his forge, the core of the tale remained unchanged. For the kingdom remembered, long after the last echo of the hammer faded, that the strongest hearts do not conquer the world. They do not bend fate to their will, nor do they break their enemies upon the wheel of wrath. The strongest hearts look into the dark and see the light that still flickers there. They reach across the gulf of fear and touch the wounded soul on the other side. They heal, and in the end, that is the only magic that ever mattered.